I think theatre is one of the most resilient art forms. It has been challenged by other modes of expression and entertainment and other cultural sort of models that have always kind of seemed to signal the death of theatre. Like, what must the audience's expectation right now be? And is it multiple? Is it not a singular thing? Like, everybody expects this thing. They expect fast entertainment, or they expect, spectacle. I don't know what it is right now.
Neel Chaudhuri is a playwright and theatre director based in New Delhi. He is a founding member and former artistic director of the Tadpole Repertory. Neel studied history and film and spent a year working in Berlin before returning to India to work in the theatre. He was the artistic director of the First City Theatre Foundation, where he wrote and directed his first 5 plays. His plays include Godspeed, Tara Mandal, Still and Still Moving, and most recently, Quicksand. Neel is a member of Lincoln Center Directors Lab in New York and Pluto, a collective of international theatre directors. He works actively as a repertory mentor with Agaz Theatre Trust and is one of the managers and curators of Downstairs, an underground theatre performance space in Delhi. Neel has received the Vinod Doshi Fellowship, the Aditya Vikram Birla Kalakiran Puraskar, and the Shankar Nag Award for his work in the theatre. We are so very happy to have you here with us, Neel. Like, it's a great honor to be speaking to you on this very topic. These are some difficult and testing times, but yeah, thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you. Thanks for thinking of me and asking me.
So Neel, I'm just going to start with the first question, which is just about this topic only. How do you think the pandemic has impacted performing arts, particularly the theatre in India?
I think it's impacted the theatre quite significantly. I mean, at a very obvious level, live entertainment of any kind has not been possible, and so, as much as any other live forms, dance, music, etc., have been affected, the theatre has been severely affected as well. I think the act of gathering in a space and that shared space and the liveness of the performances is at the root and the essence of theatre. So when you take that away, there are multiple challenges. There are challenges to livelihood, there are challenges to the culture itself, and there are challenges to this kind of collective imagination of theatre practitioners. Like, where do they go from here? So the other challenge that has presented itself to many people is that in an environment like this, and perhaps this is not just to do with the pandemic, but multiple sort of emergencies that are facing people in kind of different aspects, political, socially, health-wise, in this kind of last 2 or 3 years, then what is the actual role of theatre makers, and what is the role of theatre? What can theatre do? Like, how can theatre be part of that dialogue, that environment, that context? And I think that was already questioned before the pandemic started. I think many people were thinking, like, what sort of work should I make? What kind of work seems urgent right now? And of course, there are many theatre artists and storytellers who don't work with that perspective, who very much enjoy the art for the sake of the art, or their imperatives are more in terms of, telling entertaining stories. And I'm not kind of qualifying one over the other, but I think that in the last 2 or 3 years, addressing a certain kind of socio-political context has become a little more urgent, whether you do it in an entertaining manner, whether you do it in a slightly more pointedly political manner. I think these are and those challenges have stayed even after the pandemic began. I feel a little strange kind of speaking, because I don't think I represent an urgent enough or majority voice in this, and I mean um, in terms of the degree of challenges that people have to face. This kind of the problems that this period has caused and the pandemic has caused has been for theatre artists who count on the theatre for their entire livelihood, like it is their singular profession, and also this includes those members of the theatre that one never really sees. Kind of, when you think of theatre, automatically people think of actors, and then you think of directors and writers, but and then further on designers, but like technicians, people who work as the labor that runs actual theatre spaces, people who do a lot of the production work, they exist almost on a sort of daily kind of labor sense with that profession. And when that profession no longer exists, like theatre can move into other spaces, it can move into the digital realm, it can move into audio, it can move into it can kind of integrate at some level with film, but that doesn't account for a lot of the artists can make that transition, but technicians struggle to do so. The entire backstage crew and staff of spaces don't have that opportunity. So I think that it's significantly impacted. I find it difficult to think of the theatre as a singular industry in India, because there are many parts to the theatre, and each of them are their own theatres. Like, they're their own industry, they're their own cultural context and framework. And I think all of them have been affected in different ways. And I think that it's artists who have the fortune to be working in other fields to be able to easily transport their skills and aptitude into other spaces, or have had the luxury or the expertise to adapt to a more digital sort of kind of performance space, that have been doing okay. But yeah, by and large, it has affected the theatre very significantly.
All right. Just taking from one of the points that you mentioned regarding not just the health challenge, but a lot of other socio-political challenges in the last couple of years. Theatre anyway used to be considered as a little unconventional profession for a lot of people in this country. How do you think this has impacted young people in their pursuit in theatre? Like, are they likely to get more opportunities, or it is something that repels a lot of youngsters from entering this space?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you in any sort of accurate statistical sense, but my feeling is that there are more young people who are interested to use the theatre as a active medium of storytelling, of expressing themselves, expressing their context now than there were, I would say, 20 years ago, which is around the time that I was graduating from college and thinking about, the possibility of theatre as a future. I think that number has significantly increased. It may have been dented. It may, of course, have been affected by the pandemic. But there are a few things here. I feel like, at least in some spaces, not all, because many theatre systems still are hampered by concerns of certain kind of sort of feudal attitude of, these are the people, these are the sort of gatekeepers of the culture, by elitism, by sexism, all kinds of things. And I can be critical of all of this while recognizing that my own career may have been benefited by some of these kind of systems. But I think there is still kind of greater access now there are more young theater companies. There are more spaces that are not sort of that are less intimidating than before. There's a lot more learning by practice occurring right now, because actually theater education in India at a professional level is still very underserved. There are very few theater schools. And so I noticed, at least this, I would say about 3-4 years ago, that the number of people who come in for theater workshops, who come and talk to us saying, I want to have a career in the theater, I want to train, I want to practice, I want to learn more, was significantly larger. There are multiple reasons for this. Theater is an easier space to get into at some levels than film. So people with acting ambitions, for example, they find the theater easier to sort of penetrate into. And because theater, most of the time that you spend is in what you would broadly call practice, which is training, rehearsal. And, whereas in film, you show up for a shoot and your entire experience could be over in a day or 3 days, And so people are enjoying that deep investment. The second reason is that I think it's possible right now to tell bolder, more provocative and stronger stories in the theater. One of the benefits to an otherwise very sad situation of the lack of audience in theater, one of the benefits to having a small audience, to having sort of dedicated intimate spaces to theater, as opposed to people performing in large sort of public auditoriums, is that people are making much more experimental, innovative work. People are asking kind of harder questions. Certainly, from my perspective, there are more penetrative questions being asked in the theater than in some of our more public and popular mediums, like film and whatever you would call sort of the whole OTT scene, Netflix, etc. That's in between film and television. So I think that there is great interest. Has that interest been interrupted or influenced by the fact that there's a pandemic right now? Sure, but I think there are still people turning up for the number of digital sort of interactions that are going on. I think the moment spaces open up, you will see a lot of people returning. I'm quite confident of that. I think that also because of the sort of social atmosphere of theater, it's going to be challenging to return to it because people may still be in a state of fear about their health and their safety. But it's also one of the things people are craving. People are craving to be back in a rehearsal room. People are craving to work in the physical space with other people. At the same time, and perhaps we'll talk about this later on in this interview, there are groups that have been able to mobilize and integrate the digital space into a wider theater practice and culture in a way that is exciting, that is drawing in people, and maybe those people won't show up if it's actually in physical space. Maybe the convenience of logging into your laptop and being part of a improv session or a workshop or being able to access a reading is much easier for them now than it was when you had to kind of drive halfway across the city maybe to access those things. I'm, of course, speaking here of the urban environment, which is kind of not the whole story. And I hope you are, of course, talking to other people who have different parts of the story from different parts of our culture and context. But certainly in the urban environment, the digital space has enabled some people to interact with theater who weren't before.
Right. In what manner has the pandemic impacted the kind of stories and material you choose to put forth? You have already mentioned, and as we already know, that most of the working within theatre has moved to the digital medium now. Has there been a transition in the sort of stories and materials that were being presented before and now? And if so, in what sense, in what capacity?
I mean, it's probably an obvious point to note that isolation is a theme, right? I think that's going to be sort of a theme that people are exploring in different ways. Isolation, solitude, longing. I think these are things that I see happening around. There are also ideas that I find myself thinking about when I sit down to kind of write and evolve ideas right now. There is also, to my knowledge, a certain amount of very sort of pointedly political satire and commentary that is coming out from certain kinds of artists who are who I think for whom they may have had to shift medium and forms of interaction, modes of interaction, but the stories that they're interested in telling continue to be influenced by the immediate context around them. Apart from this, I'm not really sure how much the pandemic itself has influenced the kind of stories that people want to take. I think the first thing that I mentioned, that are stories of kind of being isolated, of a certain kind of solitude. I think they are definitely there, and I think that's part of a collective imagination across the world right now. And how often there's kind of the entire globe share sort of one thematic preoccupation, and so I think that's an opportunity for multiple people to say that, kind of connect globally and tell certain stories, and for those stories to resonate with each other. Yeah, I think that's what I think about thematic preoccupation.
Right. So do you think this digital space has made theatre more accessible to people? Also, is it easier for young artists to innovate and adapt according to the challenges of the pandemic? What is your opinion on this?
In response to your first question, it depends on who you're talking about, because I think that, like I said before, there are some people who are finding greater access to not just theatre plays and performances and in that aspect, but conversations around theatre and participation in sort of dialogue, debate that's just on theatre or on sort of cultural on the cultural context. A lot of people find greater access to that digitally. I mean, it's probably easier to attend online seminars, online conversations, roundtables, to log into kind of these spaces. And at the same time, there are some workshop spaces, some performances that are easy to log into because the physical logistical hurdles that one would have had ordinarily. I'd give you an example. In a city like Bombay, to finish up work and drive across the city to attend the performance in Prithvi by 7:30 p.m. or 9 p.m. may not be possible for a lot of people. But to kind of wrap up sort of one Zoom screen, that's the work screen, and then log into another digital platform to watch a show, may be easier for them. And again, I reiterate the point that I'm talking about a specific kind of audience that is sort of digitally fluent and digitally sort of had that kind of access, that probably has a more sort of great access to the theatre now. But there's a large community of people in cities and outside cities who's for whom the ritual of theatre very much is showing up in a physical space and sitting down and meeting friends and sharing space with the community and watching something live and being part of the conversation and the adda afterwards. And that is that entire sort of cultural experience for whom, and a lot of these people don't have access to sort of high-speed internet, don't have access to the kind of sort of portals and pages that are sort of moderating this, and so that audience, that community of people have suffered greatly. I mean, I'm not sure how many of them are interested watching the kind of work that they want to see on digital platforms, or even have that kind of possibility. So I think that it depends on what theater and what context you look at when you say that has attendance in theater increased. And in terms of younger theater people being able to innovate more with, I may have thought that in the first initial period of the lockdown, but I think enough time has passed now for anybody in the theater, including senior theater practitioners, who feel like, okay, I want to embrace the digital, I want to kind of use the digital in a way, to have done the sort of groundwork and the research, to have worked with collaborators, and whether it's coders or programmers, or whether it's just people within their team who have a sort of greater sort of aptitude for these things, have done that work and are now sort of proficient enough to program a lot of their work online. So I don't think that being young has any particular advantage in this regard. I mean, the thing that I would say is that some of the young people that I know who've embraced the digital, their inclination to kind of try anything. I'm going to try anything. I'm going to explore all the possible sort of ways that I can do this till I find something. And that patience, that level of patience, is probably a little broader and wider than some of the older generations who actually want to arrive at solutions faster, because but here I'm probably making a generalization again, but my feeling is that there isn't a huge difference. And I think that technology itself is responding to the current time and making itself more user friendly, so that actually it doesn't alienate people who have a fear of technology.
All right. So as you mentioned earlier as well, theater for a lot of people has been more about the experience of sitting in a physical space, being with their friends or family or whoever, and watching a live performance. As we have now transformed into digital theater more due to the limitations posed by the pandemic and the lockdown, for a layman, like, what is the distinction point between a theater and any other digital performance now? Like, in the sense, do you worry that theater is sort of losing its essence in the current time that we are living, and the kind of performances that are happening due to the limitations of the pandemic?
I think theater is one of the most resilient art forms. Over at multiple times in its history, it has been challenged by other modes of expression and entertainment and other cultural sort of models that have always kind of seemed to signal the death of theater. Recently, I was in a conversation with Neel Chaudhuri, and we were kind of worrying about how's digital theater going to compete with Netflix and stuff like that. And he was talking about this. He was saying, every time something happens in television, Doordarshan came and people were like, oh, this is the end of theater. And then this happened, and I think that theater is extremely resilient and innovative. Like, the numbers may shift. I mean, there may be far less people watching theater now than there were at another point in time. The way people watch theater, the kind of theater they watch, all of these contexts shift. But I think that the theater itself is extremely adaptive. I can only answer this question personally because I don't really know what theater means to a kind of the lay audience member. What is their expectation right now from the theater? That's something that I'm still sort of contending with, something I'm grappling with. Like, what must the audience's expectation right now be? And is it multiple? Is it not a singular thing? Like, everybody expects this thing. They expect fast entertainment, or they expect, spectacle. I don't know what it is right now. It's still something, and I also don't know what actually the art of theater means to other theater makers. Like, what is the thing that they are anchoring themselves in this current time that allows them to then say, okay, I can do this in this way on the digital medium. So I think different people are finding different things. Some people are saying that as long as I can bring a group of people together, like this gathering of people, who are sharing time. Now, we are sharing time more than we are sharing space. I mean, you could think of, I mean space in the physical sense, but we're sharing time, and that becomes its own kind of space. And as long as I can do that, I am operating within sort of the ethos of the theater, right? And multiple people have said that that's enough for me, and I'm going to do my work. I'm going to adapt it for the screen, but it's theater to me. And I think, for example, Kaivalya Plays, which is a group in Delhi, have been prolific in this time. They've done 2 or 3 productions. They've done weekly sort of improv sessions. They've done investigations into all kinds of themes, and they work a lot with mental health, with safety in sort of cultural spaces. And I don't speak on behalf of them, but it occurs to me that the key element for them is we need to bring people together, and in that bringing together, things will happen, right? So that's one way of thinking at it. There's other people have other questions. There's a lot of doubt about, if it's recorded, if you're watching a recorded thing, is it theater? Is it film? There are all these multiple people grapple with multiple things. My key question is that how does one think of liveness? Like if you think of liveness as being the essence of theater, that then to me it kind of broadens the conversation, right? It broadens the conversation. Like a telephone call is live, it broadens how you look at, like a website can be live, when you say the website is live or the site is live now, you don't mean that somebody is actively sitting there at the computer waiting for you to log in. It means that it's active, it's ready, it's waiting for you. And I think that there's multiple ways to think of liveness, and I think that it's how you define liveness for yourself or for your group or for your collaborators that makes the difference. And I think the audience then comes in and responds to that. And in the manner in which they respond to that and what they take from it is really what defines the overall experience. And I think that that's where theatre's resilience will show, that how can we continue to make the things that we think valuable in the theater emerge and appear and function in this sort of digital space.
Right. How do you think the work of theatre companies which are more involved with community theatre, like Agaz, has been impacted in the last year and a half? Like, considering that you're related to Agaz, so in light of that, how have you seen that transition taking place in the past year?
So the thing with Agaz is, as a community, as a group of artists, they already, their ethos and their mission already includes working in multiple manners, multiple ways, in multiple modes, with multiple groups of people, right? They're not just a theatre company. They work in their own sort of basti area with different kinds of people, with children, with women. They work in other community areas. They work in other creative forms, that are kind of spaces like listening circles or sort of book clubs, and this predates the pandemic. And it's very much at the core of their identity. It's not something that they do when they are not performing. It's not circumstantial in that way. Agaz as a group has already been facing multiple challenges in the past few years. The sort of political atmosphere, the kind of risk to livelihood, all of these things. Before the pandemic. Now, of course, the pandemic has presented sort of logistical, infrastructural, livelihood challenges. But I think that this resilience of the theater is also works in an extremely sort of meaningful way when the core of a sense of community already exists, already exists by virtue of who you are. So they are already a community, and these particular members of the community have come together to form this kind of creative group, but they still kind of show up for each other in other ways in their lives. And I think that they have embraced those two things, and to say that, okay, we need to support each other as people, but also as artists, and face these challenges together. And they have their own internal challenges as well. And I think that they're moving forward. They're moving forward in the best way that they can. Certain plans, of course, have had to change. Like, they may have been doing this kind of work right now, and I know that there was a big shift in kind of what had been planned and what was being envisioned by the repertory and the larger group. And it obviously there were several adjustments made, but they are still involved in both creative processes and community processes. And I think that they've had to return to this work with a different kind of resolve because of the pandemic, but yeah, I think that a lot of community theater work, depending on what demographic, what context it belongs to, gets affected in different ways. Like, I'm thinking a lot of street theater companies whose, the essence of their work is to be out in the streets and to perform amongst kind of, assembled crowds. And I've spoken in a limited sort of capacity to, members of Jannaty Manch, for example. This is a huge challenge for them. Like, they were, I think, just about getting back into the mode of performing earlier this year, the beginning of this year, when the second wave hit. And, so I think that there's definitely a challenge. There are challenges to people who perform kind of as traveling companies, when such severe restrictions have been placed on travels. I think that there are sort of multiple challenges. I think that a lot of urban theater company practitioners, primarily because many urban theater practitioners don't find themselves so rooted to a singular identity of a theater company or a community. So they can kind of move around and sort of be, they have that flexibility. They can go where work kind of takes them. And also because a lot of urban theater practitioners, I wouldn't say a majority, but a lot of urban theater practitioners know that they have to bolster their sort of financial day-to-day needs with other work, and they do that. And so they have that to fall back on. So they can actually go long periods without doing their theater work. It does, that daily urgency doesn't present itself.
So it is estimated that lakhs of Indians or some or the other capacity involved with the performing arts sector, be it theater, music, dance, and majority of them are doing it professionally, are getting, they are making their livelihood from it. Given that there has been a massive impact on their financial capacity to make a decent living in the past year, why do you think the government has not provided any financial support or any support in general to the performing arts sector? What do you think about this?
I mean, I'm not shocked by this, because if you think about it, what is our sort of national budget for the arts and culture? It's some ridiculous percentage, like 0.17 or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not very far off, even if it's 0.7. Huge percentages of that budget go to the state agencies, your academy, your National School of Drama, your museums, etc. I mean, if that is your policy, if that's your outlook on culture, in a time of stability, I mean, it's clear that during a time of crisis, during a time of pandemic, that their priority is not in how can we support the artists in this country. I mean, that's just not like, it's depressing, but it's not surprising. I mean, if you look at, I mean, certainly Europe, of course, but parts of Latin America and Australia and New Zealand, it's just the envisioning of what the role culture and the arts play in the overall social health is different. And so they have to invest in it. They're not doing it because they feel sorry for artists, they feel bad that artists are not making a living. They're doing it because they have to keep that part of their culture and economy and social strength up. And that's why they invest in it. But we don't even have that belief. We don't. So I mean, it's a kind of dismal outlook from the beginning, and it's really going to take massive changes in policy and the sort of overall mission of governments and how they view the arts before this change is made. I'm sorry, I'm being extremely sort of cynical and bleak, but it's not something that we should be shocked by. We can be angry about it, but it would have really surprised me. I mean, I sometimes think, okay, the Delhi government, but at least the Delhi government has invested a lot in education, and I sometimes think that this government should understand, even if it's within the context of education, what role do the arts play. But on a national level, I just think it's already so dismal. It's already, their attitude towards the arts in general is so poor. I mean, the one art form that kind of can significantly has the numbers to make a difference, which is cinema, they're just trying to clamp down on it even further with their new kind of motions towards kind of a more hardened stance on censorship. So clearly they're not kind of trying to enable, they're trying to hamper.
And I think somewhere it also comes down to the respect people in performing arts receive from society in general. These are not, still we live in the time where these are not preferred areas to work. People generally don't respect a lot of artists, neither their art. So I think a lot of the support, the lack of support primarily stems from this very broader response that the performing arts get, pandemic or no pandemic, from society at large. So I don't think unless and until that changes, any significant change is going to be visible in policy or in action. So
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay, just my last question now. So what can the common art enthusiast or fans do to support and prompt theatre or related art, especially in these times?
I think the one thing is to sort of just show up in multiple ways. And I would say this during non-pandemic times also. I found myself as a theatre maker and as a director feeling the need to sort of be gracious, but also push audiences who came to our shows to say thank you, but attend more shows, go watch more theater, we need each other. It's not we want to sell tickets. It's the more you attend theater, the more theater becomes a robust kind of art form and evolves within itself. If you are going to make strides artistically, socially, aesthetically, imaginatively in the theater, you need to know that there are people demanding that from you who are filling the seats, right? And I think the same would be true now, albeit in a different context. If theater is to improvise and find new forms of resilience in this moment, and let's not pretend that it's going to go back to normal, because given everything that's happened in the last 2 years, some fundamental shifts have happened, and we don't even know how that's going to manifest when we return to a physical reality of moving about safely in the world, whenever that is. Because people have evolved a new relationship with devices. Some of them already had it, but some of them, how are they going to break that and go out sort of joyously into the open? I don't know. There might be people like, what, I can do everything from my laptop, so I don't need to step out, and that could be a new challenge. What I'm saying is that in this current moment, it would be great if people sort of show up and embrace whatever new language, whatever new movements the arts in general are taking. I mean, I think that to accept something for what it is, and not to deny it for what it isn't. To not to come to a performance and say, oh, this isn't like being in a theater. I can't, the smell of the theater is missing, and the sensation of a stranger sitting next to me is missing. But that's impossible. What I'm doing is something different, and I would like you to see it as something new, but as something meaningful. And I'm saying this being one of the people who hasn't gone out of my way to make digital work. I mean, I've been trying to make a piece of work for a year now, and I just haven't been able to complete it. So it's not like I've made multiple digital sort of shows and I want people to say like, no, come and watch this. But I think that artists need the audience and need people, young people, enthusiasts, fans, to demand something, to come with sort of expectation and desire, to then be able to say that, okay, like, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to give you something. And if that something doesn't work this time, I will try something again. And that contract of showing up for each other, challenging each other, is something that I think everybody needs to hold up right now. And I think that it's one of the positive things that we can do at this time. It's one of the positive ways to listen, to share time and space. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Neel, for taking out the time. Just before leaving, I'll just like to make a small announcement. So, given the unprecedented times, we are trying to do our bit. So, ITISARAS has started an online petition on change.org, urging the Ministry of Culture to provide some sort of assistance to artists who are struggling in these times, to carve out policies specifically designed for them. And it'd be great if you can just ask people who follow you, who follow your work, who really admire your work, to just go down on the link and be a part of the movement, support us in our endeavor. And ultimately it's all about people who are employed in the performing arts. I still consider a lot of people like us are still in a little capacity privileged than a lot of others who were working on a daily wage basis. A lot of technicians. I recently had an interview in which I heard about this. I heard about this one person who was highly skilled technician, was working in the industry for 15 years, managing the lights, and he ultimately had to go back to his village and do farming because there was no other alternative available to him. So it's really heartbreaking for those people. And I think if more people join the movement, more people get involved, and more people make their voices heard, at least I'm being hopeful about it. Some impact may get created. So yeah, the least we can do is try.
Yeah, thank you. I will share your call.
Thank you so much, Neel. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thanks for watching our videos. We work hard to make sure you keep coming back for the content we produce. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel by clicking the bell icon below.